Hello, everybody. Welcome here. My name is Mairead, and I would like to read you a bedtime story. It was written by Oscar Wilde. We're going to adapt it a little bit. Oscar wrote many stories for adults and children, and he wrote this for his two little boys, Cyril and Vivian. Every night when he was around, he would read to them to get them to go to sleep. So I'm hoping you enjoyed this story that was written some time ago by a very loving father to help his little boys have a good rest and think about good thoughts. And it's called The Selfish Giant. Every afternoon, as they were coming from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a lovely, large garden with soft green grass, and here and there over the grass stood beautiful flowers like stars. And there were 12 peach trees that in the springtime broke out into delicate blossoms of pink and pearl, and in the autumn bore beautiful, rich fruit. The birds sat on the trees and sang so sweetly. The children used to stop their games in order to listen to them and say, "Oh, how happy we are here." They used to cry to each other, "How happy we are here in this garden." One day, the giant came back. He'd been to visit his friend, another giant, and had stayed with him for 7 years, a long time. After the 7 years were over, he had said that it was time for him to go home, that he had said all he had to say and his conversation was done. He was determined to return to his own castle. But when he arrived, he saw the children playing in the garden. "What are you doing here?" he cried in a very gruff voice. And the children all ran away. And here he is with a very gruff face. Grumpy giant. "My own garden is my own garden," said the giant. "Anyone can understand that, and I will not allow anybody to play in it but myself." So he built a big high wall all around it and put up a notice board that said, "Trespassers will be prosecuted." He was a very selfish giant. Oh, the poor children had nowhere else to play. They tried to play on the road, but the road was dusty and full of hard stones, and they didn't like that at all. They used to wander around the high wall when their lessons were over and talk about the beautiful garden inside. "Oh, how happy we were there," they said to one another. And then the spring came, and all over the country there were little blossoms and little birds. Only in the garden of the selfish giant it was still winter. The birds did not care to sing in it, as there were no children, and the trees forgot to blossom. Once a beautiful flower put its head out of the grass, but when it saw the notice board, it was so sorry for the children that it slipped back into the ground again and went back to sleep. The only people who were pleased were the snow and the frost. "Spring has forgotten this garden," they cried, "so we will live here all year round." The snow covered up the grass with her great white cloak, and the frost painted all the trees silver. Then they invited the north wind to stay with them, and he came. He was wrapped in furs and he roared all day about the garden and blew the chimney pots down. "Oh, this is a delightful spot," he said. "We must ask the hail to visit too." So the hail came. Every day for 3 hours he rattled on the roof of the castle till he broke most all the slates. And then he ran around and around the garden as fast as he could go. He was dressed in grey, and his breath was like ice. I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming, said the selfish giant one day as he sat looking out the window. And he looked out at his cold, cold white garden. I hope there will be a change in the weather, he said. But the spring never came, and nor came the winter. The autumn gave golden fruit to every garden, but to the giant's garden she gave none. He is too selfish, she said. So it was always winter there, and the north wind and the hail and the frost and the snow danced about through the trees. One morning, the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard some lovely music. It sounded so sweet to his ears that he thought it must be the king's musicians passing by. It was really only a small little bird singing outside his window. But it was so long since he had heard a bird sing in his garden that it seemed to him to be the most beautiful song, the most beautiful music in the whole wide world. Then the hail stopped dancing over his head, and the north wind ceased roaring, and a delicate perfume came in through the open door. Oh, I believe the spring has come at last, said the giant, as he jumped out of bed and looked out. But what did he see? He saw the most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall, the children had crept in and were singing in the branches of the trees. In every tree that he could see, there was a little child. And the trees were so glad to have the children back again that they were covered in blossoms. And they were waving their arms gently above the children's heads. The birds were flying about and twittering with delight. And the flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. Oh, it was such a lovely scene. Only in one corner of the garden, it was still winter. It was the farthest corner of the garden, and in it was standing a little boy. He was so small that he could not reach up to the branches of the tree, and he was wandering all around, crying so sadly. The poor tree was still covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was blowing and roaring above it. Climb up, little boy, said the tree, and it bent its branches down as low as it could. But the boy was too small. And the giant's great big heart melted as he looked out. Oh, how selfish I've been, he said. Now I know why the spring would not come here. I will put that little boy on the top of the tree, and then I will knock down the wall, and my garden will be the children's playground forever and ever. And he was really, really sorry for what he had done. So he crept down the stairs and opened the front door quite softly and went out into the garden. But when the children saw him, they were so frightened that they all ran away, and the garden became winter again. Only the little boy did not run away, for his eyes were so full of tears that he did not see the giant coming. And the giant stole up behind him and took him gently in his hand and put him up into the tree. And the tree broke out in blossoms, and the birds came and sang on it. And the little boy stretched out his two arms and flung them around the giant's neck. And he kissed him. And then all the other children, when they saw the giant was not wicked any longer, they came running back. And with them came the spring. "Oh, it's your garden now, little children," said the giant. And he took an axe and he knocked down the wall. And when the people were going to market that day, they found the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden that they had ever seen. And all day long they played, and in the evening too. The giant said goodbye to the children, and spring stayed. He said, come back tomorrow. Come back and play and make spring forever. And every day, every afternoon, when school was over, the children came and played with the giant. And the giant was very kind to the little children. Ah, how beautiful it is. Years went by and the giant grew old and feeble. And he used to sit in the large armchair and watch the children in the garden and admire his garden grow. He said, "I have many beautiful flowers, but the children are the most beautiful flowers of all." How beautiful are the flowers of my garden. The children are the most beautiful flowers of all. Good night, children. Sleep well. Thank you for listening to Oscar's story, The Selfish Giant.